The peaceful village of Kalyan 9 was quiet in the early morning, with the sun just beginning to rise. It was a place where families lived in harmony with nature, growing crops and tending to animals. The air smelled fresh, and the breeze was soft. But today, this peaceful world was about to be torn apart. Lyra, an alien mother, sat by the window of her small home, watching her daughter Mira play outside. Mira, a curious child with large, bright eyes, laughed as she ran across the field, chasing the colorful butterflies that fluttered around her. Lyra smiled at her daughter, feeling proud and happy. They were safe here, far from the dangers of the galaxy. But little did they know, danger was already on its way. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the ground. Lyra's heart raced as she stood up quickly, her eyes wide with panic. She ran outside, looking toward the sky. Black ships appeared, their dark outlines blocking the sun. They were care warriors, known for their merciless attacks. Lyra's stomach twisted in fear. The care had arrived. Mira came running back to her, eyes wide with confusion. "What's happening, Mama?" she asked, holding onto her mother's hand tightly. Before Lyra could answer, the first arrow flew through the air, hitting the ground near them, was followed by more arrows, sharp and deadly. The village was under attack. Lyra knew she had to protect Mira. She grabbed her daughter and ran. But the care warriors were closing in fast. "Stay close to me," Lyra whispered, pulling Mira behind her. They ran toward the nearby forest, hoping to find shelter. Care were too fast, and soon they were surrounded. One of the warriors, a large alien with glowing red eyes, pointed his bow at them. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. There was no way to escape now. Without thinking, Lyra stood in front of Mira, shielding her with her own body. She couldn't let anything happen to her daughter. The warrior aimed his bow at Lyra, and before she could react, the arrow flew through the air. It struck her side with a sharp pain, and she gasped, falling to the ground. Mira screamed, "Mama!" Her voice was full of fear and desperation. She rushed to Lyra's side, trying to help, but Lyra was already weak from the pain. Her vision blurred as she struggled to stay conscious. Blood soaked her clothing, and she felt herself slipping away. In the chaos, a figure appeared in the distance. It was a human, a soldier. Cade had been sent by the Earth Federation to assist planets in need, and he had arrived just in time. Cade was tall, strong, and moved with the confidence of a seasoned warrior. He had seen battles before, but he had never seen anything like this. Without hesitation, Cade pulled out his energy rifle and fired. Hitting the care warrior square in the chest, the warrior fell to the ground, lifeless. Cade didn't stop there. He rushed toward Lyra and Mira, firing at the other attackers as he went. The care warriors, realizing they were no match for this human, started retreating. Cade reached Lyra and Mira, kneeling beside them. "Are you all right?" he asked quickly, checking Lyra's wound. Lyra could barely speak, but she nodded weakly. Mira was crying, her small hands clutching her mother's arm. Cade knew he had to act fast. "I'm going to help you," he said, lifting Lyra gently into his arms. He knew they had to get out of the open, away from the care. He ran toward the forest, Mira following closely behind. They needed to find shelter, and fast. Cade found a small cave just off the path and carefully laid Lyra down inside. He checked her wound again, and his face grew serious. It wasn't just a scratch, it was deep, and she was losing a lot of blood. "Stay here," Cade ordered Mira, his voice gentle but firm. He moved quickly, searching the cave for anything that could help. His training had prepared him for many things, but he had never been trained to treat an alien wound like this. Still, he had to try. Mira nodded, her eyes full of fear, but she trusted the human. He'd saved them. He had to be good. Cade returned with some medical supplies and did the best he could to stabilize Lyra's condition. He worked fast, knowing they didn't have much time. As he worked, Lyra slowly regained consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at Cade, still weak but aware of the situation. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Cade nodded, his expression serious. "We need to get you to safety," he said. "The care will come back. We need to be ready." Lyra struggled to sit up, her pain still evident, but she knew Cade was right. They couldn't just stay here. Mira was watching them, her small face full of worry. She had never seen a human before, and she was still trying to understand what had just happened. Cade looked at the girl and smiled softly. "It's okay. You're safe now," he reassured her. Myra didn't say anything, but she stepped closer to him, holding onto her mother's arm. She had no idea what the future held, but for now, she felt safe with the human soldier. As Lyra rested, Cade kept watch, his thoughts racing. What were the Care after? Why had they attacked this peaceful world? He had no answers, but he knew. One thing for sure, he couldn't leave these two alone. The Earth Federation had sent him here to protect, and that was exactly what he was going to do. The battle wasn't over. The real fight was just beginning. The cave was quiet, except for the faint sound of the wind outside. Cade had done everything he could to help Lyra. He'd used what little medical supplies he had, but he wasn't sure if it would be enough. Lyra was still unconscious, lying on a bed of moss and rocks that Cade had carefully arranged. Mira, her small hands still trembling, sat next to her mother, staring at the human soldier in awe. Cade had never imagined his mission would take him to a place like this. When he had received the call from the Earth Federation to help with the Care threat, he thought it would be a straightforward mission: protect the planet, defeat the enemy. It was simple. But now, after meeting Lyra and her daughter, things had changed. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was their protector. Myra hadn't said much since the attack, but Cade could see the fear in her eyes. He knew it wasn't easy for her to trust a human she had never met before, especially in a moment like this, but something about the way she looked at him made him feel like he needed to earn that trust. He couldn't just be the stranger who saved her life. He needed to be something more, someone she could rely on. Cade turned his attention back to Lyra. Her breathing was steady now, but she was still weak. He had done what he could for her wound, but there was only so much he could do with limited resources. He needed to get them somewhere safe. The Care warriors were still out there, and they would come for them again. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. Myra broke the silence, her voice small but clear. "Who are you?" she asked, her eyes still wide with curiosity. "Why are you here?" Cade glanced over at the girl. She was so young, yet she had already seen the worst of what the galaxy had to offer. He could see the pain and confusion in her eyes, and it reminded him of the pain he had felt when he was younger, before he became a soldier. "My name is Cade," he said softly. "I'm part of a team sent to protect your planet. The Earth Federation has been keeping watch over many planets in this part of the galaxy. When we received a distress signal from your planet, I was sent here to help." Mira looked at him with wide eyes. "Earth's Federation," she repeated as if the words were unfamiliar to her.
"What's that?"
Cade sat down across from her, trying his best to explain in a way that she would understand. "The Earth Federation is a group of planets that work together to keep peace in the galaxy. We protect each other from people like the Care. My job is to keep you and your people safe." Mira seemed to think about this for a moment, and then nodded slowly. "So, you're not like the Care?" Cade shook his head. "No, I'm not like them. I'm here to help, not hurt. I'll protect you and your mother." Mira seemed to relax a little, though she was still nervous. She reached out and touched her mother's hand, her small fingers brushing against Lyra's skin. "Will Mama be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cade looked at Lyra's pale face. He wished he had better news to give. "I don't know. I'll do everything I can to help her, I promise." Mira nodded again, her face filled with a mixture of hope and worry. Cade could see the bond between mother and daughter, and it made him feel a deep sense of responsibility. He had to protect them, not just because it was his job, but because they were good people. They deserved to live without fear, and he would do whatever it took to make sure they had that chance. The sound of footsteps outside the cave suddenly caught Cade's attention. His hand instinctively moved to the weapon at his side. But he quickly realized that the steps weren't those of the Care warriors. They were too light. too careful. Stay here, Cade whispered to Myra. Don't make a sound. He crept toward the entrance of the cave, carefully peering out. To his surprise, it wasn't a warrior he saw, but a small group of villagers, some of them with makeshift weapons, others with simple tools. They were coming to check on the survivors, and Cade was relieved to see that they hadn't been followed. By the key or dot, one of the villagers, an older woman with a kind face, stepped forward, her eyes filled with concern. "Are they safe?" she asked, her voice gentle but urgent. Cade nodded. "For now. But we need to move them. The care will be back soon. They'll know we're here." Gah! The woman's face tightened with worry, but she didn't argue. "We'll help," she said, turning to the others. "You're not alone in this. We'll protect you." Cade felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had known the villagers would want to help, but hearing their support made him realize just how important it was to work together. They couldn't fight the care alone, but together they stood a better chance. As the villagers gathered around Lyra, they began to make preparations to move her. Cade helped as best as he could, using his strength to lift the injured alien woman and carry her to a safer location. The villagers led the way, moving cautiously through the forest, making sure not to attract any attention. Mira walked beside Cade, her small hand clutching his arm. She didn't say much, but her quiet presence was comforting to him. It was strange being around someone so young in the middle of a war, but it reminded him of why he fought. Not just for the galaxy, but for the people who lived in it, people like Myra and Lyra, as they moved deeper into the forest. Cade couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The care were out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, but Cade was ready. He had a duty to these people, and he wouldn't fail them. "I won't let anything happen to you," Cade whispered to Myra as they walked. "You're safe now." Myra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. For the first time since the attack, she smiled just a little. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for saving us." Cade smiled back, though he knew that battle was far from over. There was still much to be done. But for now, he was doing what he had set out to do, keeping them safe. The sun was setting as Cade and the small group of villagers finally reached their new hiding spot. It was a cave tucked away deep in the forest, far from the village and its dangers. The villagers had prepared the cave with blankets and supplies, creating a safe space for those who had been hurt. Lyra was resting, still unconscious, but breathing steadily. Mira sat beside her mother, holding her hand and watching Cade as he checked the area for any signs of danger. Cade had been quiet since they arrived, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Care had attacked too quickly, and they weren't known for random raids. There had to be a reason behind their actions, and Cade needed to find out what that reason was fast. "We can't stay here forever," Cade said, turning to the villagers. "The Care won't stop until they get what they want, and we need to know what they're after." The villagers looked at him, their faces grim. The older woman who had spoken to him earlier stepped forward again. Her name was Aaliyah, and she had lived on Sirius 9 her entire life. She had seen many things, but never an attack like this. "I've never seen the Care this aggressive," Aaliyah said. "Usually, they take what they want and leave. But this time, it feels different. They were too quick, too organized." Cade nodded. "That's what I'm worried about. We've seen the Care act like this before, but it's never been on this scale. They're not here just to raid, they're here for something more." Aaliyah looked at the cave entrance. "Then what do you think we should do?" Cade paused for a moment, thinking. The first step was always the same: gather information. He couldn't face the Care without knowing their plans. But how would he get the information they needed? The answer came to him suddenly. "There's a place," Cade said, "an old research facility not far from here. It was abandoned a long time ago, but it might still have some useful information. If we can get inside, we might be able to find out what the Care are really after." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to get there?" "The Care are everywhere. Move at night," Cade said. "The cover of darkness is our best chance." Aaliyah nodded. "You're right. We'll help you." Cade was glad for their support. He knew that moving under the cover of darkness was dangerous, but it was their best shot. They didn't have much time. Lyra's condition was improving slowly, but she still needed rest. Mira, though still scared, was becoming more comfortable with Cade and the villagers. It was clear that she trusted him now, and that trust meant everything. As the night fell, Cade gathered the villagers together. They would need to be quiet and careful. The Care were strong, but they could be outsmarted. Cade's plan was simple. Sneak past the enemy forces and reach the research facility. Once inside, they would search for any clues about the Care's intentions. Mira clung to Cade's side as they set out. Walking through the dense forest, she was small, but her presence gave Cade a sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future. For Mira, for Lyra, for the people of Suraz-9, as they walked deeper into the forest. Cade could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He had been through countless battles, but this one felt different. He wasn't just fighting for a mission or for orders. He was fighting to protect lives. The lives of people who had become more than just strangers. They had become his responsibility. The group moved carefully through the trees, staying low to the ground. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves seemed too loud in the silence of the night. Cade kept his senses sharp, listening for any sign of the Ka-Or. It wasn't long before they reached the outskirts of the abandoned research facility. It was a large building, half covered by vines and overgrown plants. The windows were dark, and the doors had been sealed for years. But Cade knew there was still a way inside. He had been here once before during his training, but he had never imagined he would return under these circumstances. He approached the building, signaling for the others to stay back. The Care hadn't discovered this place yet, but that wouldn't last long. Cade moved to the side of the building, finding the small entrance he had used years ago. It was hidden, just barely visible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Cade motioned for Mira to stay close and helped her climb through the entrance first. One by one, the villagers followed, each of them making sure to be as quiet as possible. Cade went last, making sure the entrance was sealed behind them. Inside, the facility was dark and musty. The air smelled stale, and the floor was covered in dust. But Cade didn't have time to take in the surroundings. He moved quickly, heading toward the main control room. His heart raced as he pushed open the door. Inside, the room was filled with old computers and abandoned equipment. Cade went straight to the main terminal, hoping it would still be operational. Powered it on and began typing quickly, his fingers flying across the keyboard. It had been years since he had used this system, but his training kicked in, and soon enough, he was able to access the data. "What are you looking for?" Aaliyah asked, her voice breaking the silence. Cade didn't look up. "I'm looking for anything that can tell us what the Care are after, why they're here." He scanned through the files, his eyes moving quickly from one document to another. Most of the files were corrupted, but then he found it. A report dated just a few days ago. It was a message from a Care commander. "They're looking for something." Cade muttered under his breath. "A weapon. Something powerful enough to change the balance of power in the galaxy." Read the rest of the report, his brow furrowing. With concern, the Care were not just here for a raid. They were looking for a weapon that had been hidden on Cyrus-9 long ago, and they would stop at nothing to get it. "We need to warn everyone," Cade said, turning to the others. "The Care aren't here for the village. They're here for something much more dangerous." Alia's face was filled with shock. "What is it? What kind of weapon?" Cade didn't have the answer, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it could change everything. The atmosphere in the research facility was tense. Cade stared at the screen, his mind racing as he read through the document he had just uncovered. The Care were after something much worse than a simple raid. They were after a weapon that could shift the power of the entire galaxy. This was bigger than just the villagers and the Earth. Federation, it was about the fate of many worlds. He glanced over at Mira, who was sitting quietly in the corner, her small face full of concern. Her mother, Lyra, was still resting in the back of the room, though her condition had improved slightly. The wound on her side had been treated, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the fear she carried. It was clear she was worried, not just for her daughter, but for the whole planet. The Care were ruthless, and if they found what they were looking for, no one would be safe. Cade knew they had no time to waste. They needed to move before the Care found the weapon they sought. But as he looked at the villagers, his thoughts drifted to what he had promised them. He had promised to keep them safe. And that meant more than just running from the Care. He had to figure out how to stop them from getting the weapon. "Is there anything else we can use here?" Leah asked, her voice breaking Cade's thoughts. She had been watching him, and now it seemed she was waiting for him to give an answer. Cade turned to her, his expression serious. "There's a lot of old equipment here, but nothing that's going to help us fight back against the Care. What we need is knowledge. Anything that could tell us more about the weapon they're searching for." Aaliyah nodded. "There's an old library in the village. It's where all the records were kept before the Care came. Maybe there's something there that can help us." Cade thought for a moment. That's a good idea. But if we go back to the village, it will be too dangerous. The Care are still out there, and we don't know how many more of them there are. Aaliyah frowned, clearly thinking hard. "Then what do? We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us." Cade was silent for a moment. "There's another way. I'll go back to the village myself. I know the area better, and I'll be able to move quietly. We'll get the information we need, and I'll be back before the Care even know." "I'm there." Aaliyah didn't seem convinced. "And what about us? We'll just sit here while you go out there alone." "I can't risk anyone else getting caught," Cade said, his voice firm. "You need to stay here and keep Lyra and Mira safe. This is my fight. I'm the one who's trained for this." Leah didn't argue. She could see the determination in Cade's eyes, and she knew there was no changing his mind. She looked at Mira, who was watching Cade intently. Mira had been so quiet since the attack, but something about her calmness now told Cade that she had accepted the danger. She knew the Care were real, and she knew her mother's life depended on their survival. Cade walked over to where Mira sat. She looked up at him, her big eyes wide with uncertainty. "I'll be back soon, okay?" Cade said, kneeling beside her. I need you to stay here with your mother. Keep her safe. I promise you nothing will happen to her." Mira nodded slowly, her face still pale. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice trembling. Cade smiled softly. "I will." He then turned to Lyra, who was still resting. He placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "I'll be back soon," he said to her as well. "Stay strong." Lyra opened her eyes, her gaze focused on Cade. She gave him a weak smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Though the gratitude in her eyes said more than words ever could, Cade stood up, nodded to the villagers, and then turned toward the exit. The night air was cool as he stepped outside, the darkness providing a blanket of cover. He moved quickly but quietly, staying close to the shadows and keeping a low profile. The path to the village was long, but Cade knew he couldn't waste any time. Every moment counted. As he made his way through the forest, his thoughts returned to Lyra and Mira. The bond between mother and daughter was strong, and Cade could feel the weight of their lives resting on his shoulders. He had promised to protect them, and now he had to keep that promise, no matter what it took. The village wasn't far, but Cade knew that even the slightest noise could give him away. He had to be careful. He had to be smart. If the Care saw him, it was over. But he couldn't let that stop him. The information in the village library was their only chance to understand what the Care were after and how to stop them. As Cade neared the edge of the village, he stopped and crouched low, peering through the trees. The Care were camped around the area, but they didn't seem to be looking for anything specific. They were waiting. For what? Cade didn't know, but he had to get past them. He couldn't risk being seen. Cade stayed low, moving with the shadows as he crept through the village. The buildings were abandoned, their walls scarred by the recent attack. The village, once bustling with life, now felt eerily quiet. Cade reached the library without incident, but as he stepped inside, he realized it was worse than he thought. The library had been ransacked. Shelves had been overturned and books scattered across the floor. The Care had already been here, searching for something. Cade searched quickly, flipping through the papers and books that remained, hoping to find a clue. It wasn't long before he found it hidden in a dusty old book. There was a map of the planet's underground network. It led to a place marked the Vault, a hidden chamber deep beneath the surface. Cade felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what this meant. The Care had been after the weapon for a reason. They weren't just raiders, they were after something much more powerful. He quickly folded the map and tucked it into his jacket. He had to return to the cave, to Lyra and Mira. They needed to leave immediately. But as he turned to leave, Cade froze. He heard footsteps behind him. The Care had found him. Cade's heart raced as he heard the footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, his hand reaching for his weapon. There was no time to think. The Care warriors had found him. His mind raced as he scanned the room. The library, once a place of knowledge, now felt like a trap. The Care were closing in, and Cade had to act fast. There was no time for a fight, not here. Not now. He had to get back to the cave with the map before the Care could stop him. Cade crouched down, his back against the wall, and held his breath. The Care's footsteps were getting closer, their heavy boots echoing in the empty village. He knew they were looking for him, and they wouldn't stop until they found him. He quickly glanced around the library. There was a small window at the far end of the room, but it was too small to climb through. His only option was the door. But it was already blocked by the Care. He could hear their voices now, their alien language echoing through the village. Cade gripped his weapon tighter. He wasn't going to let them catch him. He moved slowly, staying low, using the shadows to his advantage. Every step had to be careful. The slightest sound could give him away. He had to be smart. The Care warrior standing near the door took a step forward. Cade didn't waste any time. He lunged, tackling the warrior to the ground. The Care was larger than him, but Cade had the element of surprise. He quickly grabbed the Care's weapon and used it to knock him out. The warrior's body went limp, and Cade dragged him out of sight, hiding him behind a shelf. Cade's pulse was racing. He had to get out of there before more Care showed up. He could still hear their voices from outside, but the map was more important. He needed to get back to the cave, to Lyra and Mira. Cade moved silently toward the door, but just as he was about to leave, he heard a shout. More Care had arrived. He was trapped. Without thinking, Cade grabbed the fallen warrior's weapon and aimed it at the door. He fired, hitting the Care who had just entered the room. The shot echoed through the building, and Cade quickly ducked behind a stack of books. The Care soldiers outside were now alerted to his presence. Cade knew he couldn't stay here. He had to move. He ran to the back of the library, where a narrow hallway led to the back exit. But as he moved, the floor creaked under his weight, and he heard the Care coming closer. We're getting too close. With no other choice, Cade made a run for it. He dashed through the hallway, using his training to stay low and fast. He could hear the Care behind him, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They were getting closer, but Cade didn't slow down. He had one goal, to get back to the cave. As he reached the back door, he burst through it, stepping into the cool night air. But he didn't stop. The village was still dangerous, and the Care were still hunting him. He ran through the streets, dodging the Care who were patrolling the area. His mind was focused on one thing, getting back to the cave. He could hear the Care shouting behind him, but he didn't look back. His legs were burning with exhaustion, but he pushed through the pain. He had to make it. He had to warn Lyra and Mira. The path to the cave was long, but Cade knew the way well. He knew the forest better than anyone, and he used that to his advantage. He cut through the trees, weaving between the thick branches and vines. The Care would have a hard time following him in the forest. It was dark, and the thick trees made it harder to track his movements. Cade's heart pounded in his chest as he neared the cave. He could see the faint light from the entrance in the distance. He pushed himself harder, his breath coming in quick gasps. He couldn't stop now. He had to make sure Lyra and Mira were safe. As he reached the cave, Cade slowed down, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. He stepped inside, his senses alert. The villagers were still there, but Lyra and Mira were nowhere to be found. Cade's heart skipped a beat. "Where were they, Aaliyah?" Cade shouted. "Where are they?" Leah appeared from the shadows, her face full of worry. "They're gone." They heard the commotion and took off. He tried to stop them, but Cade didn't wait for her to finish. He turned and bolted out of the cave, his mind racing. Couldn't let them get caught by the care. They were vulnerable. The care would show no mercy. He ran through the forest, calling out for Lyra and Mira. His voice echoed through the trees, but there was no answer. Panic began to rise in his chest. What if they had already been caught? What if it was too late? Cade refused to believe it. He wouldn't let the care take them. He kept running, his heart pounding louder with each step. He had to find them. The sounds of the forest filled his ears, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of insects, the crunch of twigs under his feet. But amid those sounds, he heard something else, a faint scream. It was Lyra. Cade's heart leapt. He followed the sound, moving faster than ever. The scream grew louder, and he knew he was close. Pushed through the underbrush, finally breaking into a small clearing. There he saw them. Lyra was on the ground, her eyes filled with fear. And Mira was standing next to her, her small body shaking with fear. But they weren't alone. Two care warriors were closing in on them. Without thinking, Cade raised his weapon and fired. One of the care fell to the ground, and the other turned to face him, anger in its eyes. But Cade didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, knocking the care down with a powerful blow. The warrior struggled, but Cade was faster. He grabbed the care's weapon and used it against him, knocking him out cold. Cade turned to Lyra and Mira, his heart still racing. "You're safe now," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We have to go now." Lyra nodded weakly, standing up with Mira's help. The three of them turned and ran back into the forest, away from the care, their hearts filled with hope that they had finally escaped. Cade's heart was still racing as he led Lyra and Mira through the forest, his mind constantly checking for any signs of danger. The care had not given up, and he knew they would stop at nothing to capture the villagers and find the weapon they were after. Every step they took felt heavier, like the weight of the galaxy was on their shoulders. But Cade had made a promise. He would protect them no matter what. "Keep up," Cade said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. Lyra was still recovering from her injury, her pace slower than it should have been, but Mira stayed close to her mother, holding her hand. Cade could see the fear in their eyes. They had both been through so much, and now, even though they were running for their lives, they still trusted him. That was a responsibility Cade didn't take lightly. The forest around them was dense, the trees towering over them like silent sentinels. The shadows were thick, and every rustle of the wind made Cade's senses sharp. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The care were out there, and their numbers would only grow. They had been running for hours, keeping a steady pace, but Cade knew they couldn't go on like this forever. They needed to plan a way to get ahead of the care, to take the fight to them, but they also needed rest. Lyra was getting weaker, and Mira was exhausted, her small legs barely able to keep up. Cade had to find a way to give them both a break. "I know a place," Cade said, suddenly stopping. He turned to look at the others. "It's not far from here. It's a small cave where we can rest for a while. We need to regroup." Lyra nodded weakly, her eyes filled with exhaustion. "Lead the way." Cade didn't hesitate. He turned and led them through the forest, moving quickly but cautiously. They couldn't risk being too loud, but they couldn't afford to waste time either. The care were probably searching the area, and they couldn't stay in one place. For too long, after a short while, they reached the small cave Cade had mentioned. It was hidden beneath a cluster of thick bushes and vines, almost impossible to spot unless you knew exactly where to look. It wasn't much, just a small dark space large enough for them to rest in. But for now, it would have to do. Cade moved, quickly helping Lyra into the cave. Mira followed closely behind, her small face pale with fatigue. Cade's eyes softened as he looked at the child. She had been so brave, staying calm in the face of everything that had happened. He admired her strength, even if she didn't fully understand the danger they were in. "Rest here," Cade said, settling them down in the corner of the cave. "I'll keep watch." Lyra leaned back against the cool rock, her breathing slow, but steady. "Thank you," she whispered. "We would never have made it this far without you." Cade gave her a small smile. "It's my job to protect you. I'll make sure you both stay safe." Mira curled up next to her mother, her eyes slowly closing as exhaustion finally took over. Cade watched them for a moment, then turned his attention back to the cave entrance. His senses were on high alert. The care could be close. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. As the night grew darker, Cade remained still, watching. The entrance of the cave. Kept his weapon close, his mind sharp. There was no telling when the care might show up. It could be hours, or just minutes. The forest around them was quiet, too quiet. Cade had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, his instincts were telling him something wasn't right. He could feel the tension in the air. The feeling of being hunted was like a shadow hanging over them, and it made him uneasy. Minutes passed slowly, and Cade's mind kept running through different scenarios. What were the care looking for? What was this weapon they were after? And how much longer could they keep running before the care caught up with them? Just as he was about to check on Lyra and Mira, a sound cut through the stillness. A crack of a twig snapping. Cade's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing. His pulse quickened as he reached for his weapon, his body tense. He had learned long ago that when you heard something in the woods, it was never a good sign. He crouched low and moved silently toward the entrance. His heart was pounding in his chest as he peered through the dense underbrush. For a moment there was nothing but the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. But then he saw movement in the trees. Cade's breath caught in his throat. It was a care warrior. But this one was different. This one was alone, creeping through the forest with a quiet precision. Cade's eyes narrowed as he watched the warrior move closer, his footsteps barely audible. It was clear the care were still hunting for them. Cade moved quickly, slipping out of the cave and into the shadows. He had to act fast. The care couldn't. No, they were there. He needed to take this warrior out before he could alert the others. He crouched low, his body pressed against the ground as he crept up behind the care. The warrior was close now, just a few feet away. Cade's heart pounded in his chest, and he tightened his grip on his weapon. With a swift movement, Cade lunged, knocking the care to the ground. The warrior struggled, but Cade was quicker. He used the care's own weapon against him, knocking him unconscious in seconds. Cade stood up, his breathing steady, but his heart still racing. Ah! That had been too close. The care were still out there. They were getting closer. Cade dragged the care's body into the shadows, hiding it from view. He needed to get back to Lyra and Mira, but he couldn't risk being followed. He waited for a moment, listening carefully for any more sounds. When the forest was quiet again, he turned and made his way back to the cave. When Cade returned, Lyra and Myra were still asleep, their faces peaceful for now. Cade stood in the doorway, watching over them, his thoughts consumed by the danger they were facing. He had taken down one warrior, but there would be more. The care were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they found the weapon they were searching for. Cade knew they couldn't stay here forever. They had to move, and they had to move fast. The care were closing in, and the only way to stop them was to find the weapon first. But as he looked down at Lyra and Mira, Cade realized something. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was personal. They were his responsibility, and he wouldn't fail them. Tomorrow, they would make their move, but tonight they would rest. For tomorrow, the real battle would begin.